Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series. For our current show, it's an honor to be here, curated by Maria Burke and Madeline Beaumier. Today, we are thrilled to present artist Michelle Stitzlein. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. Feel free to utilize that chat function, ask questions, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of the talk. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be some variation of bandwidth. So if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. All right. Thank you, everyone, and welcome, Michelle.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'd like to thank you, Kat and Paniota, for the invitation to present, as well as the curators, Maria and Maddie, for the opportunity to be included in the exhibition. I'd also like to thank the Ohio Arts Council, not just for today, but for the support it has offered my work and artistic career over many years. The Ohio Arts Council has encouraged my best creative efforts and in turn has allowed me to share those results with the public. I'll first describe a little about my family and my background. And I know this is a black and white photo. I'm not going to show you my entire genealogy history, but my maternal great aunt, Isabella Taylor, was an artist and teacher. Here she is standing on the far right. She was originally from Lancaster, Ohio. She taught art and music at the Oakwood Friends School in Poughkeepsie, New York, from 1925 until 1964, almost 40 years. And the Oakwoods Friends School has a long history of inclusion and diversity. It was among the first schools in the U.S. to integrate students, welcoming their first Black student in 1933. The school still exists and thrives today. On their summers off, she and her husband, Paul, a math teacher at the same school, would come back to Logan, Ohio in Hocking County to their cabin on the lake. It was there that my mother spent time with her sailing and admiring her handmade jewelry. I own some of that jewelry that has been passed down, and here she is teaching a jewelry class. Isabella and Paul would also travel to the Southwest and visit with Native American artists, bringing home handcrafted items that they purchased to decorate the school library, as well as their quarters on campus. My mother told me many times that my husband and I reminded her of Isabella and Paul. Isabella died in 1964, and I never had the opportunity to know her as I came along 3 years too late. And after a bit of family research, I discovered she donated a few of her own paintings of the Hocking Hills area to the Logan Library. And it was about 1965, I believe. And I wondered if they were still there. And so one day in 2022, I jumped in the car and voila, 60 years later, I found them. They were still on display at the Logan and Laurelville Hocking District Libraries. They had been there that whole time. And to make it an even more full circle experience, I am scheduled to do presentations at both libraries this June, this summer reading programs. Looking forward to it. My mother, Annette Saurin, was greatly inspired by her aunt Isabella. She became an art major at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio in the late 1950s. After graduating, she took a position at a calendar company in Coshocton, Ohio, doing both artwork and paste up alongside male coworkers in an era of Mad Men of the 1960s. She signed her name A. Saurin. She believed her work would be respected more if people weren't aware a woman was behind the paintbrush. She never stopped signing her name this way. After I was born, she left full-time work and freelanced as both a commercial artist and a professional painter. She sold original paintings and prints at art fairs, and this is downtown Old Dublin. She was talented in working with oils and watercolors and enjoying painting landscapes and structures, and took many local commissions, these being just right around the corner from the Rife Gallery, both of them. My grandmother once commented that every painting my mother painted, there was a storm brewing somewhere, dark and moody overtones. But my mom loved painting trees, clouds, and skies, and I grew up seeing her at the easel. My parents met in Coshocton. My father's family was from the area, and he was also descended from another creative family in the ceramic and pottery industry. I was born in 1967 in Coshocton, and this is me on the left, painted by my mother. I was a shy kid who attended 8 years at a Catholic school and spent a lot of time outdoors. I remember exploring the lake we lived on in the stream behind our house on most free days. Arts and crafts projects were abundant, and family trips to art and history museums were common, probably every weekend. In high school and summers home from college, I worked for a local potter, learning how to glaze and stencil. I helped at local art fairs and wholesale shows. And I enrolled at the Columbus College of Art and Design and graduated with a degree in interior design in 1989. After school, I worked in the field for about 3 years. I could spend hours mixing and matching samples, but realized that while I loved the textures and patterns of lush fabrics and wallpapers, I didn't really enjoy the paper shuffling process of specifying and ordering products. A lot of paperwork. I feel strongly that the foundations I received at CCAD have served me well, though, and I'm still mixing and matching. Lots of samples. So I recalibrated and I came back to craft. I worked in multiple arts administration positions, including 10 years with Ohio Designer Craftsman. Some of you may know it as the Ohio Craft Museum, which is a part of it. I enjoyed assisting craftspeople with their product designs and marketing their handcrafted ceramics, blown glass, jewelry, textiles, and woodworking. I was a manager and buyer in the show of hands retail galleries, as well as a representative at wholesale trade shows, like the image here, shows in New York and Philadelphia. So fast forward to the year 2000, when my husband, Nathaniel, and I were married. He is also an artist who works in varied media, and together we love art, nature, and travel. I am lucky to have been from a supportive family of artistic that supported my artistic endeavors, and to also have wed into a family supportive of creative pursuits. We moved to Baltimore, Ohio in early 2001 after we purchased and renovated a Grange Hall, approximately 5 miles from Nathaniel's parents' and childhood home. They are right down the road from us. And rooted in agriculture, the National Grange Association encourages rural and farming communities to meet, socialize, and learn the latest advances in agriculture. They're still around, but the chapter associated with our building dissolved, and we purchased the structure at a live auction in 2000. It was built in the 1950s, and it is a concrete block, split level with hardwood floors and open spaces. Architecturally, it's just a box, but we painted it bright teal and repurposed it to house our living space downstairs and our studio upstairs. This is our shared studio. It's approximately 30 feet by 70 feet. And it was the Grange purchase that my transition to self-employment that allowed me to expand the scale and extent of my work with repurposed materials. I had more time, space, and storage. Square footage like this probably would have been impossible for us to afford in New York City then and now. And like this, I feel Ohio offers many positive attributes for me and my work. Also finding materials. I think it'd be really hard for me to find materials on the streets of New York and be able to get it back to my studio, as opposed to here in Ohio, where I can throw it in my pickup and go back to my studio. The building has provided a home and space for us to work in an unusual and unorthodox environment, to grow and expand our interests for 25 years. It was an affordable and perfect solution, and we love it. We love it still. In 2010, we started introducing native plants and removing invasive species to encourage wildlife and insects to flourish in our yard. Our friends Jennifer and Steve of the Common Milkweed in Cardington have been a huge help with that endeavor and a tremendous source of information to guide us along the way. Our history is in the arts and we've always been outdoor folk, but we are learning so much. We're learning so much. We created a pollinator field with bergamot cup plant, rattlesnake master, blazing star, Culver's root, mountain mint, Sullivan's milkweed, Riddle's goldenrod, and foxglove beard tongue. It's a mouthful, among others. And it changes. It's constantly changing. Some things are taking hold better, and then other things fall back. And it's been really interesting to watch the progression of the field. Our yard provides a home and sustenance for all creatures, human and non-human alike, as well as an abundance of inspiration. We also enjoy hiking in local and metro state parks. We're always eager to learn about our surroundings and to explore nature's visual artistry. For she is the best pattern maker, the ultimate designer, the maker of the most unique, quirky, and ephemeral life. The things I see when I'm exploring outdoors may not be literally translated into my work, but their influence definitely runs deep. And I am humbled that nature seems to effortlessly make such incredible beauty. Comparing and contrasting industrial materials in the waste stream with natural elements in the landscape is a daily occurrence for me. In these images, there is seaweed piled and twisted on the beach, and then on the right, a lichen patch growing on a rock surrounded by moss. So as an example, please compare that to this. Old ropes that are tangled, knotted, and frayed on the beach with a broken ceramic shard showing years of crazing. It is interesting to me to see how the climate and the passage of time can corrode and fade manufactured materials, almost clawing them back to nature. These juxtaposition of nature-made and man-made are fascinating to me. So there you can see, almost so similar. Another activity I enjoy when exploring the outdoors is the process of identifying or IDing moths, caterpillars, and mushrooms. For me, it is an opportunity to challenge my eye, to exercise my observational skills. Some species of mushrooms are so similar that they are only identifiable with the tiniest of details or a microscope. I don't take it to the microscope, but I do try to look at small details. In my pursuit, I'm challenged to notice where the mushroom is growing. On a dying tree, a rotting log, or growing out of the ground. In a wooded area, in piles of scat, or an open grassy area. On or under what kind of tree? A hardwood, a conifer? Are the gills attached or unattached to the stem? Here they are unattached. Does the mushroom have gills? What color? What color are the spores? Are the mushroom caps spotted? Textured? Acting as a host to other fungi? Bell or funnel shaped, growing in groups or clusters? Flat or disc shaped? All of these steps ask me to take notice, to pay attention with my eyes. And I take hundreds of photos. I'm guilty, very guilty of taking hundreds of photos. Word memory is difficult for me, and soon after I've ID'd a species, I tend to forget the name of it within a few days. But the process of identification has most definitely strengthened my visual memory muscle over many years. And that's important. That's what I'm after, that visual exercise. We frequently refer to our photos as a resource full of our travels from near and far, I made the sketch on the left from a photo, and Nathaniel made the set of cards on the right, inspired from the previous image. Sometimes just being awestruck is the only reaction one can have to things we find in the natural world. These are beach blight aphids dancing a defensive warning. Just amazing. I tend to focus in rather than out, and I note the details that require inching closer and closer. Here is a curled up caterpillar trying to avoid my inquisitiveness. A few years ago, we were curious about the life cycle of two different types of silk moths. So for 2 years, we raised their eggs into caterpillars. Here you can see the Promethea caterpillar on the left and the Cecropia on the right. This is a Cecropia caterpillar in its 5th and final instar on a wild cherry tree. Nathaniel is protecting the caterpillars from birds and owls with mesh bags that we change daily to remove excrement and provide the caterpillars fresh leaves to eat. And sometimes that was a lot of work. They eat quite a few leaves. This is the Promethea caterpillar on a tulip tree poplar leaf. And here is a Promethea moth on the left and a visiting Polyphemus on the right, both majestic. I just love them. This beauty is a freshly emerged eclosed male Cecropia moth. It is the largest moth in North America. The antenna can detect female pheromones from miles away. Their wings and furry bodies are masterpieces of nature, and these exotic creatures are native to the Midwest. If you've not seen one, perhaps after many years of living in Ohio, and I have heard that from a couple of people, it is very likely we need more native plants and trees. Every yard can make a difference. And here the cycle begins again. This female has laid eggs. The ability of a moth to blend in so well with their habitat is, to me, a study in texture and pattern. My piece included in the Rife exhibition on view now is clearly inspired by that phenomenon. Everywhere I go, I am looking for signs of caterpillars and moths. This is a giant leopard moth on the left, and I'm still trying to ID the one on the right. Sometimes it's a process over many months or years. Silk moths are my favorites. Here is a royal walnut moth and an imperial moth that I spotted at the annual Moth Lovers Conference. Yeah, there is a conference held for moth-loving people. It is at the wonderful preserve called Ark of Appalachia in southern Ohio, Bainbridge, Ohio, to be specific. And Mothapalooza is the name of the conference. It's where amateur and experienced naturalists commune between the hours of 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. on humid nights to look at white sheets in front of light bulbs under the gaze of the moon and ID moths. Kindred folk. I love it. This past December, Nathaniel and I visited the Winter Museum and Library in Delaware State, where I requested to see a rare book of folios from 1898. In this unusual approach to an identification guide, in a format that would be frowned upon today, the moth wings of actual collected specimens were affixed to the pages and the moth bodies were etchings. Interesting to think about the implications of how we approach nature and the future fallout actions there might be, even when we think we're acting on behalf of nature. As an opportunity for artists, some national parks offer residencies in exchange for educational programming and lectures at the park. In August of 2021, I was awarded a 3-week residency at Shenandoah in Virginia. My accommodations were in a portion of a cabin overlooking the hills at Skyland Lodge. That's my cabin there on the left and my view on the right. Each night I went out onto the porch and walked to the lamppost to find and identify moths. I discovered and identified more than 40, a lot of which were new to me. And my process was that I would photograph them, and then later the next day, I would look at my identification guide. And one of those new discoveries was the scarlet-winged lichen moth. It's the bright and gray moth on the far right in the middle row. I've never seen one in Ohio. They're here, but haven't seen one. Its larvae feed on pale and green lichens. And so it's amazing to me that it's such a vibrant red. And if any moth should be in Ohio, it would be that one. It's gray and scarlet. During the day, I hiked, sketched, and developed concepts for future works. There's a scarlet wing lichen moth sketch, along with a beautiful but invasive spongy moth there on the right. I saw it on actually an egg laying area. So that was new. I have now created over 30 moths in the series. I'll show you just a handful here. They are inspired by real species of moths and butterflies, but are actually created entirely from my imagination. I do think a lot of people think my work is actually depictions of real moths, and that's not the case. I occasionally borrow Latin words and names for the titles, but also names that are special to the materials. So if you're paying really close attention, you might see a brand name or something in the title. They range in size from 3 foot to 12 foot in width. And in photographs, they're occasionally confused for brooches or real insects when there's no indication or relation to scale. It's sometimes not until you recognize items like piano keys or handlebars that things start to come together. Children in your family might recognize the series. There are 10 large pieces permanently on display at COSI, the Center of Science and Industry in Columbus. They're up on the second level mezzanine. You can see them just as you walk in, and I'm really happy to have them there. They're on view every day as opposed to being in storage. And that's been a really, really good thing. Some of the pieces were created as commissions. This 6-foot piece was created for a couple in Northern Ohio. There were more piano keys, as you can see, and slide carousels. Slide carousels being something that's a dated technology, and I use quite a few things from dated technology, mice, computer mice, and so forth. Even smaller versions are hanging in homes over fireplace mantles. This is a 3-foot moth. This is a more literal translation of a monarch, which is about as close as I've come to an actual moth or butterfly. It was created specifically for the Bruckner Nature Center in Troy, Ohio, and it's about 6.5 feet wide. And this represents some of the steps involved. The rusty metal is salvaged from a barn roof as the drip edge. And you can see I used quite a few orange items, things that might have been from the junk drawer or something like that. But this piece used up almost everything I had in my supplies that was orange. And here it is on site at the Nature Center. And everything that you see here, again, maybe something from a junk drawer, everything to me is potential art material. Once it's broken or no longer useful, especially if it's colorful, there aren't too many things that I don't see as art material. Another commission was with Domino's Pizza, and it involved a moth and a beetle sculpture. Domino's shipped me materials such as signage and other marketing goods that were being discontinued and updated with new graphics. So they shipped me these things that they were going to put in the landfill. You might recognize the D and the O's in the beetle. Those are what spells out Domino's. And then the delivery car toppers, the 2 items that look like they're wings. Those are actually the shark fin toppers that they use on the top of a delivery car. This is my installation currently at the Rife, and it was a new approach for me to combine these two series. The moth was titled white cedar moth after an Australian insect, and the surrounding background was titled Protea longifolia, inspired by shrubs in Africa. Together, it's titled Protea longifolia as habitat. Essentially, I've mixed two ideas inspired from two different countries. And it touches on the issue of invasive species of insects, such as what we're experiencing in Ohio with the spotted lanternfly. The fly just happens to be an incredibly beautiful insect, but it is unfortunately out of its normal range in Asia. The fly mostly feeds on an invasive species called tree of heaven, also found in Ohio. And it was brought to the States intentionally many years ago, and the fly arrived accidentally through trade. Nature and human involvement in nature is complicated. And perhaps my work, borrowing names and habitats, mixing man-made materials with natural inspiration, and combining real with imagined is my way of making a viewer stay on their toes. There is a halo effect around the moth, which reminds me of the phenomenon in nature called crown shyness, when treetops of trees do not touch one another and create a beautiful negative space of line work in the sky when looking up. And I'll just add that while we were installing this piece, again, most of the pieces that I install happen on the site. So it's always a fresh happening. I don't know what's going to happen myself. And I started to install the units tight, really tight around the moth. And it was about, I don't know, half hour into it. And I said, no, that's not right. There needs to be some negative space. And I'm really happy with that effect. Here's an example of, on the left, of crown shyness, but the limbs with snow on the right are also an example of beautiful lines. My work is inspired by so many things in nature. It's limitless. Another national park residency was at Denali in Alaska with Nathaniel in August of 2018. This trip allowed me to see a part of the country I had never known, and it was a 10-day residency, 60 miles into the park. It was a requirement to bring a partner for safety purposes, but also having Nathaniel there as an artist was interesting to see how we were drawing inspiration from similar things, albeit for different artistic approaches and directions. We were given a satellite phone and bear spray and sent on our way to a small cabin with no running water or electricity. And again, because it was 60 miles in, there are no gas stations out in the middle of the park. So you're driving in 60 miles and you have to rely on your one tank of gas. And again, this is a 6 million acre park. So you do a lot of hiking. I saw plants and insects in a landscape completely foreign to me. And I believe nothing can change a personal perspective faster and more thoroughly than travel. Seeing and experiencing new things is the best path to individual growth as well as artistic development for me. And perhaps my first and last time to see wolves in their natural habitat. It was wild. And I'm surely changed because of that encounter in the millions and millions of other split seconds that make a person who they are. How can that not affect my artistic output? My most recent residency experience was in 2022 at the Headland Center for the Arts outside of San Francisco. It was an opportunity available to me as an artist who has been awarded individual excellence grants through the Ohio Arts Council. A cohort of 12 artists and writers from all over the world convened for 6 weeks. My session was during the months of September and October. All of the studios were located in former Army barracks in two large buildings on the campus. And I was proud to represent Ohio in this manner and very appreciative of the opportunity. This was my second floor space with wonderful large ceilings and light, and also an example of a sketch seeking new directions while I was there. I gathered materials at a creative reuse center in the city in my suitcase, hauled them back to my studio. It was a solid time slot to just focus, think about new directions, take notes, read, and actually create work. My work has been greatly affected by residencies. If you are an artist or writer, I highly recommend considering applying to one. They exist all over the world. And the Ohio Arts Council and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources recently partnered, and they had 2 residencies at state park lodges, which is really exciting. Lots of opportunities. In 2013, I began a body of work titled the Feinbow Series. It's inspired by a mostly dry and arid biome or microclimate in South Africa. And specifically, the protea shrub. It's a tough plant with beautiful spiky petals that grows in the region. In addition to the protea, I also look to types of succulents and cacti. I'm attracted to repeating elements of similar shapes to create patterns. And the layers and layers of spikes, filaments, petals, and leaves that appear to create solid masses. And those who know me know that groupings of circles have always been appealing to me, as are collections. If you've been to our home and studio, collections are all over our home and studio. I mean, there are collections of globes, advertising tins, seed pods, baskets, afghans, aprons, wooden spoons, and we enjoy displaying collections and rearranging them. I see my Feinbow pieces as an extension of my desire to collect and display. Only I'm creating these unique but similar objects and grouping them together. My work in this series is made with old, used, and scavenged garden hoses, plus electrical wire, defunct computer cables, bicycle tires, packing strap, mini blinds, you name it. This installation was 15 feet wide by 8 feet high at the International Museum of Art and Science in McAllen, Texas. A lot of people tell me that the series reminds them of coral and seaweed. Others see fireworks. I encourage all experiences. Each piece is composed of hundreds of multiple individual units. Some are 6 inches in diameter, others are 36 inches in diameter. And you can imagine those 3-foot pieces, if it has 4 or 5 garden hoses on it, it can get very heavy. So my work is occasionally a challenge to install. I do have twilight zone fears that if perhaps in the far future the planet suffers a massive loss of plant life and animal extinction, that my work could be used as a representation of real nature, a faux flora and fauna that never existed and no one alive realizes is incorrect, like a large dusty diorama representing plant life in a natural history museum. Those are my nightmares I lay awake at night thinking about. Solo exhibitions give me the opportunity to share my ideas in a concentrated way. These are images from a show at Springfield Museum of Art in Ohio. And in 2019, I was invited to have a solo show at the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix, Arizona. Each of the Feinbow pieces is an installation, and when displayed in different venues, it is organized in a different format, unique to that space. In Phoenix, this piece was 27 feet wide by 12 feet high. At times, feeling like a thick shag rug or an organic textile, or maybe even a living wall. Due to the pairing of materials and imagery, the series brings to mind our struggles with sustainability, solid waste, and drought. We extract natural resources to make more products, often destroying more habitat, only to dispose of those products soon after. We mow large swaths of grass and eliminate native plants that feed pollinators, and then turn around and water non-native plants with miles of garden hose, despite that the planet is parched. So why do I attempt to make my work beautiful? Why celebrate the destruction of nature with the very materials that are jeopardizing the planet? I feel, and I hope, that if I can make something entertaining or engaging with objects destined for the landfill, I have made a last-ditch effort for creating value from trash. And what could someone else do with other materials that are being wasted? Can I spark ideas to encourage a more sustainable future in others, product designers, architects, and so forth? I work very large. I'm a quiet person when I'm not given the opportunity to present. And I am loud with the scale of my sculpture. I enjoy that presence in a space to make an artful visual statement as well as begin a dialogue. I attempt to bring beauty and attract attention to an otherwise dirty topic, one as a society we'd rather forget. Previously used materials are extremely valuable because natural resources are finite. They're finite. And mining those resources to manufacture products destroys habitat in the delicate balance most of us take for granted. If the items I utilize are familiar, recognizable, and owned by practically all of us, and thrown out on any given day, will the piece connect with more viewers, begin more discussions, challenge more thought, and perhaps create change? I can only hope and push forward with my abilities. So here I am collecting garden hoses at a drop in front of the Springfield Art Museum 6 months prior to the show. Patrons of the museum dropped off their leaky, used, petrified, and kinked hoses, and I created the piece seen in the previous images. Many folk came back to locate their hoses within the artwork during the exhibit. Some of them were recognizable if they had a stripe or so forth. Most of them were not, but perhaps they were surprised to see the transformation. Between the brands, there are hundreds of colors and types of hoses. Each one is scrubbed and cleaned prior to being utilized. In fact, a lot of my time and labor to create my work is in the acquisition and prepping of the materials. Here, I will show you the process to install a piece of this scale. This is the before shot in Phoenix. And actually, there were 2 windows on that wall behind me that they blocked in specifically for this installation. This is the room with a few of the unloaded units on the floor. And there were 5 people, myself and Nathaniel included, working full-time and overtime across 4 days to install this piece and 4 small pieces. I'm directing the placement of each of the 250 units. And just a fun little thing, you can see the work changes a little bit from the time that it's installed until the time it comes down, because the garden hoses relax a little bit. They droop, and you can see that in the tail end of this video. So it's kind of fun for me to see too how it changes over time, just like real plants. Most of the units are out of the frame too, so there are many more units. It was about 250 units. And now you can see these bigger pieces, they'll go on the wall and they start to sag a little bit. It's challenging to recreate pieces entirely anew while on site in a very improvisational manner, but it keeps me engaged with older work as nothing is ever finished or completed. Each venue requires new units and unique plans specialized to the location. The final installation at the Desert Botanical Garden was used as a backdrop for a few appraisals on the Antiques Roadshow. And I got messages from friends and family that it was airing again. It first aired a whole year after the installation, but they play reruns. In the same series, I created a floor piece after my time at Denali, reminiscent of the lush and spongy forest floor in Alaska. Sometimes it felt like you were walking and you were sinking 3 feet. It was amazing. Seen from different angles, as opposed to a stationary wall, this approach posed new challenges. Wine corks, bottle caps, Christmas tree bulbs are found in the details. Painted golf club handles and hidden slide carousels making up the height. It was installed as a single piece. It was the wall and the floor for the first time at the Pittsburgh Botanic Garden in the late summer of 2023 against a backdrop of the Pennsylvania forest. And if you've not been to the Pittsburgh Botanic Garden, I highly recommend it. It stayed green as things outside began to crisp and turn colors in the late fall. And again at the Mansfield Art Museum in early 2024. Within a stark, bright, and contemporary architectural structure, the piece changes. It changes its character and personality. In 2019, I created a commission for a Dayton, Ohio library inspired by the stream that is next to Huffman Prairie, seen on the left. And some of you may know, Huffman Prairie is preserved as a pollinator field, and it's where Wilbur and Orville Wright practiced their first flights. My concept sketch is on the right. The final piece was installed on the second floor of the main library in downtown Dayton. It has a sign next to it identifying several of the items utilized in the piece. Sometimes they're not that recognizable if I turn them upside down or cut them. So amassed within the piece are donations from area businesses, staff, and patrons from the library. And it becomes a type of interactive scavenger hunt for families to find, locate, and or identify objects within the piece. Sometimes it's a history lesson. For instance, a person under the age of maybe 20 might ask, what is the large green toy near the top center of this photo? Well, it's a telephone, but of course, most of us know a phone looks like a cell phone. Everything is drilled to ensure stability, and the drill is my most frequently used tool. It's become a part of my hand in some ways. In 2023, I was invited again to create a piece for the Dayton Library, this time at the Huber Heights branch. I was inspired by the work of Mary Forer Pierce, and I created an homage to her 1869 painting, Growing Flowers, which is housed in the Dayton Art Institute collection. And please take note of the red cardinal flower and the white morning glories, because you'll see how I interpreted them. The piece measured 20 by 6 feet. My concept sketch is on the bottom, and the far left quarter of the sketch was my take on Mary's painting. And then I imagined what the other 3/4 could look like on the right-hand side. So a bit of her concept and then mine as well. So here I was locating materials that would be appropriate and beginning to lay them out. The cardinal flowers have become stacks of fat-free milk bottle caps, and the morning glories have become bundt pans. The piece involved many layers, and knowing what should be attached first and last is part of the challenge. This was the finished piece in the studio in 4 separate panels. And here we are loading and installing the panels. Usually a large rental truck is involved, with installing my work, plus Nathaniel. I absolutely cannot do the installations without him. Again, the work is heavy and cumbersome. This is the finished installed piece. And here you can see the bundt cake pans again, plus plastic milk jug and soda caps, vintage hair curlers, which actually were from my neighbor, vintage linoleum, light fixtures, prescription bottles, and strapping tape. Garden hoses, light bulbs, and ratchet strapping on the left, measuring tape, bottle caps, and beer packaging on the right. 98% of the things I utilize are not painted. Some are, but most of them are not. All of the items in this piece are in their original hue. But just that piece, if you can imagine, if that had gone into a landfill, we make a lot of trash. So this is the piece seen from the road. And this was another commission for a life science company in Madison, Wisconsin. This piece was to be installed in a newly completed building where their scientists' labs were located. And I was inspired by the minutia that you would see under a microscope, but also the seeds and pods of native plants. This piece included golf clubs, again, people aren't golfing anymore, Starbucks, bottle caps, colanders, fan cages, slide carousels, pie plates, piano keys, and coaxial cable. The final installation was in 2021, and the tall white objects that are sticking out are actually plastic graduated cylinders, the science cylinders that you had in your high school science class that were old. And so the company decommissioned them and shipped them to me as art material. And that happens a lot. People want to have items in the piece that speak to them, or they own them prior to it being in the artwork. And I like that. They're more challenging. A lot of people ask me where I get my materials, and it's one of the most frequent questions I'm asked. And the answer would be anywhere I can find it. Thrift stores, yard sales, creative reuse centers across the country. I travel and I go to creative reuse centers because they're all different. Friends and family that clean out their barns, their garages, their basements, and attics tend to think of me, and I take that as a compliment. In my descriptions of my work, I generally use the term repurposed materials, as I'm not officially recycling. Nothing is getting melted down or reconstituted into a new product. I'm simply using an item in a new format. Historically, found objects has been the art term for using these types of materials. Artists like Joseph Cornell and Marcel Duchamp would fall into that category. But I feel found objects is a rather quaint and outdated term for my work. 21st century trash is not 20th century trash. So that's why I go with repurposed materials. I also attend the annual Zero Landfill event in Columbus every year. It is organized by the Ohio-Kentucky chapter of the International Interior Design Association. And it's held out on the west side. Usually it's September and October. And artists, teachers, it's free. You load up your bag or you load up your car, and it's a pretty great event. And it's just exactly what it's called, is trying to keep things out of the landfill. And I'm really happy that architects and interior designers are part of that program. I've always admired artists who create environments with repurposed materials. Howard Finster, the folk artist from Georgia, and his work is an influence. And I'm shown here at his home. Love that phrase, quote. And Nekchan in India and Helen Martin in South Africa are also influences. As an artist, I crave seeing and experiencing new things in nature, but also varied cultures. Learning about foods, clothes, art, craft, architecture, music, and traditions from other people and places is always an adventure. This is a handmade pinata shop in McAllen, Texas. And textiles in particular are a tremendous inspiration. This piece by an artist in the Mapula Cooperative in South Africa is an example of their embroidered storytelling approach and is engaging and fresh. And the processes of textile and craft skills are also intriguing to me in my work with repurposed materials. Weaving, dyeing, crocheting, sewing, quilting, and hooking sometimes informs the drilling, the folding, the framing, and layering techniques I utilize. So here are handmade aprons being modeled and a fabric dyeing happening at the Fulani Cooperative in South Africa. This is a basket weaver from Botswana on the left and another weaver from Zimbabwe on the right. And weaving of all sorts has interested me, and baskets are studies in pattern and texture with natural materials. So once again, I'm comparing and contrasting, wondering if these techniques can be mimicked with manufactured materials. These images are from La Paz, Bolivia. The man on the left was selling handmade rope, and then you can see the less interesting rope behind him, the manufactured rope. And he was in front of a hardware store. And then the man on the right is selling woven bags in the traditional style from Candelaria. And the hat and the costume that he has also traditional style. In Bolivia, this woman was wearing a tall felt bowler hat, which is part of their traditional attire. And the felt hat making, you can see, is happening in the streets on the right. And for me to look and see the equipment and tools utilized to craft such exquisite items, I mean, those hats are perfect. It is a good reminder that I don't need to have the latest tech and most expensive equipment to create my work either. Just my drill. Don't take my drill. Handmade textiles like these antique American hook rugs are, in general, full of quirks and anomalies, asymmetrical designs and imperfections. And all of my work comes back to imperfections because some of my materials were thrown out simply because they were dented, scratched, or rusty. So what has value? Does it have to be new and shiny, straight and measured to have worth or beauty? Not to me. This Afghan was in the Alaska State Fair. The loose ends, the tight snags, the crooked seams, the stretched edges, and the running out of colors, and then they picked up where they left off with a new shade, or what some might call imperfections, are beautiful and refreshing to me. All of these textiles and cultural experiences have inspired another series that I call the Fiber series. Same materials, slightly different approach, and probably more abstract. This is a 22-foot by 8-foot piece that I created with old garden hoses, electrical wire, and outdated computer cables. Here it is in Springfield, again, to understand the scale. And this detail demonstrates the multiple and hundreds of screws used in the construction that result in an effect that feel a bit like stitching or quilting when you look up close. The loose wires are a bit like a shag or a trim. You can see the squiggly lines and the awkward seams, all intended to embrace and celebrate the character of imperfection. Other works take cues from pom-poms, tassels, or tufts, maybe even caterpillars. I've created approximately 8 pieces in this series. I'm still finding my way. Sometimes I will do smaller pieces to experiment with shape, patterns, and materials. And you can see there on the left, there are actually Christmas tree bulbs in that piece as well, and lots of plastic. I use lots of plastic items. In July of 2024, I was awarded a year-long grant from the Pollock Krasner Foundation based in New York City. And it was the fiber series that I submitted as the direction I hoped to pursue further. I completed this 8-foot by 8-foot piece in November of last year. And the grant allows me time to try new ideas with the same materials, but also old ideas with materials I've never utilized in the past. This again demonstrates the amount of screws and labor required, but I just completed a second piece during the grant period, and I am excited to push forward until the end of this July. And that piece is not included in this presentation. So if you're interested, you could go to my Instagram site to see that most recent piece. So occasionally, I just want to laugh and be silly. So my mood in the studio may dictate my direction, but my media and materials always remain the same. It is this side of me that communicates best with children. I'm always hoping to encourage an appreciation for the arts, for the wonder of nature, and the need to be resourceful. And who best to do that than with children? So I donated this piece to SWACO, which is the Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio, last year, and I enjoy that it is promoting recycling in their educational facility. It's a pod on the west side. And I don't do a lot of outdoor installations because the techniques I employ or the materials I utilize, other than garden hoses, are not always weather resistant. Most of my work is drilled to a scrap wood base that will deteriorate over time. But some works will last a few months. So here is the fungi family. It is a group of scarecrows that I displayed for a Fairfield County tourism promotion and contest. They were on the corner of our property, which is a busy intersection, for a month last Halloween. This is fungi gill. You can see I used soup can lids that look surprisingly like shelf bracket mushrooms. Yeah, it's a lot of soup. Demonstrating that recycling and being thrifty can be fun. Baby Bella Button was in a garden cart and was growing out of a bed of mulch. We don't have to go to the local big box store to decorate our yard for the holidays. This was Spore the Mushroom Hunter. The pink part of the dog tongue was a toy ping pong paddle, and the purple part was a goody hairbrush handle. There is probably something in the garage, the neighbor's trash, or your grandma's basement waiting for someone to think outside the box. So something we all have in our trash is the ubiquitous bottle cap. In 2003, I was invited to be an artist in residence at a local elementary school, and that spurred a span of 15 years of visiting schools across the country to collaborate on projects with plastic caps diverted from the landfill. With those experiences, I designed several how-to projects, including bottle cap murals and sculptures, and I self-published 2 books. I usually worked with the entire school over a period of days or a week and saw anywhere from 200 to 650 kids. I would put on one of my bottle cap aprons and I became the bottle cap lady. All school presentations were about color, pattern, texture, and other artists from around the world and how they repurpose and recycle in their everyday lives. I visited schools, art fairs, and museums. And each school I visited would begin saving plastic bottle caps and lids a few months prior to my arrival. Parents, grandparents, cousins, neighbors were put to the task of saving the caps off of soda, water, milk, mayonnaise, coffee, butter, yogurt, and shampoo bottles. And I feel like the visual of just seeing these boxes full of plastic caps piling up was enough to grasp that, yes, a single community goes through a lot of trash. So even without the project alone, that the kids were saving these caps and could see it, was a pretty big visual impact. But the added step was to make something beautiful and to be creative with that would-be trash while working as a group, a collaborative effort. Kids were encouraged to develop their own ideas and their own drawings, and because the children were instructed on how to use drills, to also be empowered. Again, drill is my tool. And in that time, I saw bees, butterflies, suns, squirrels, fish, monkeys, mushrooms, turtles, rainbows, flowers, and many a beady-eyed and wide-eyed fox or two. The kids were encouraged to appreciate nature, to recycle, to express their own creativity, to open eyes to possibilities, to know that their individual contribution is valued, and most importantly, to have hope. So I retired from school visits in 2019 and I loved it, but it was 15 years. And the art teachers were incredible. We could not have done any of the projects without the art teachers, and my hat's off to all of those art teachers I worked with, and then some. I occasionally do smaller 1-hour or takeaway workshops now. And I've worked with the Fairfield County chapter of Wild Ones to create on-site projects for the annual Environmental Education Fair, where we distribute free native plants for winter sowing. And note the repurposed milk jugs. This February, I taught my Beetle Mania project, note cards with old cardboard packaging from junk food boxes. And this was something that I started at Shenandoah. I was actually using the packaging from the Shenandoah gift shop, which I had never done before. So Oreos, Pop-Tarts, Reese's, peanut butter cups, Chips Ahoy, Snickers, and Butterfinger Beetles. In the workshop, we use examples of nature, but it's not necessarily the idea that we stick with realistic depictions. Skittles, beetles are welcome and encouraged. Finally, Nathaniel and I recently embarked on a project to protect a property in Southern Ohio, and we called it Moth Holler. Appropriately, you know my love of moths. It was partially logged and under threat of more logging. We were able to halt further destruction, but unfortunately, it wasn't until after 21 trees had been taken. Large trees, too. We are removing invasive vegetation, cleaning up trash, planting native plants and trees, and repairing soil damage done by the logging. Now it is a place of conservation, refuge, and quiet to watch, sit, and encounter the creatures that live amongst us in their habitat, as it should be. We are looking and learning, reflecting on ideas, recording our encounters, and resting, and always being inspired. We hope to conserve this place for furred, feathered, and flighty creatures today and tomorrow, and for future folk, perhaps artists like my mother, who admired the skies and the trees, or like my great aunt Isabella. It might be for people I may never have the opportunity to know. You can see more of my work on my Instagram page at Michelle Stitzlein, and more of my work with schools and bottle caps on my page at artgrange.com. And if you have any questions, I'd love to try and answer them. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle. That was such a lovely journey that you took us on. I think what I'd like for you to chat a bit about is first, you have such a knowledge and ability to navigate repurposing items.
Mhm.
When did that start? How did you recognize, oh, here are things that would go into the landfill that now I can make valuable pieces of artwork for folks to reflect on?
It's a good question because it was a journey, like you mentioned, over a period of time. And I was experimenting with materials actually while I still had a full-time job, but I was working in a studio that was approximately 10 feet by 10 feet. So most of the materials that I was utilizing were obviously smaller, maybe recycled paper and textile materials that were just, they would fit in my studio. So it wasn't until we moved here to the Grange that I started collecting other items and seeing the potential that I could cut them up and dismantle them, and the scale increased. And over the 25 years that we've been in this space, for instance, the garden hose, I didn't start using garden hoses until maybe 10 years into working with repurposed materials. And partly that's because people know what I'm working with, so they will donate things to me. And for instance, the garden hoses came from my father-in-law. I was working with rusty metal and wood and that type of material. And he gave me this old yellow garden hose, and it sat in the corner of my studio for a really long time before one day I think I was making a moth, and it happened to be a yellow moth. And I needed more yellow. I needed more of that hue. So I was looking all around my studio, and my eyes rested on that yellow garden hose. And I was like, wow, well, why not? You know, why not use that? And at the beginning, I think I was also wary of using plastics and rubber in because wood, why? You know, wood and metal seem so serious. And I thought that they weren't going to mix well, the wood and the metal with the plastic and the rubber. And I overcame that. And that has also made it more colorful. I mean, plastics and rubber come in these bright colors, and the wood and the metal, not necessarily. So, yeah, so I used that yellow garden hose as a stripe on a yellow moth. And when I realized how easy it was to cut and layer, and I said, wait a minute, you know, there could be a whole series here. And about 2013, I did the first piece that was primarily all garden hoses. So, yeah, I mean, there are probably materials uh, a year from now, 2 years from now, that might present themselves that I never thought of using before. And I'm doing some of that now because of the Paul Krasner grant. I picked up some fire hoses that the fire department deem no longer useful. And I've been using those recently too. So that's new, but yeah, a progress. It lands in my studio and I look at it for a really long time until a light bulb goes off.
That's great. I love that you essentially you expanded your space, and with that, your opportunity for materials. We have a question from Margarita, who said, "Thank you so much, Michelle. What would you like viewers' biggest takeaways to be when they experience your work in a non-traditional gallery setting, i.e., perhaps a science museum?"
Yes. Well, so because I work large, I hope that from afar, somebody might be drawn in. They may not recognize at first what the piece is made of. They may not realize from afar that it is all items that were destined for the landfill. So from far, I want them to be attracted enough to the piece to walk up to it and then to engage with the piece and say, oh, hey, there's some trash in this. I threw one of those away 2 days ago. Um, so I want them to have those two experiences, to be engaged with the work from afar and then spend more time with it once they come up to it and see what it's created with. So once they see what it's created with and they've experienced, all the things in the piece that, nothing is, I use plumbing devices, I use electrical devices, outdated technology, bicycle parts. None of those are related. So it takes a while sometimes to identify them. And I think that in the process of that identification, there has to be a realization that we're throwing a lot of trash away. And if somebody can possibly think, well, maybe I could have reused this, or I have this item that I could have used in a different way. Maybe it's not make art per se, but I have another image in another presentation that is actually a shoe, the rubber sole of a shoe, and it was used on a gate as a hinge. And it's going to last forever. It's probably the quietest gate. And that type of thing, like a bootstrap kind of mentality. I think we need more of that, of repurposing. And I just hope that when somebody sees my work, that maybe they think, yeah, I could have reused that thing I threw out 2 days ago. And hopefully in the future, they'll possibly, think twice. And then also product designers. I really want product designers to know that the public wants items that are not going to be one-time use products, especially the bottle caps. And that essentially I made toys and, let's say, just Legos out of plastic bottle caps. Where are the product designers? Let's get on it. Let's make things that can have a dual purpose.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Perfect. So I'm gonna ask one last question that I think it has kind of two prongs. You mentioned in your process of installation something
Mhm.
called improvisation,
Mhm.
and that's a really important component of your work.
Yes.
Um, it's an important component of how you compose the distinct pieces. It's an
Mhm.
important component of the composition
Mhm.
when it comes in, but it's also been a guiding principle of your art journey in relationships
Mhm.
and how you have built community. And
Mhm.
I would love for you to talk about the importance of improvisation and how you apply it formally and theoretically.
Okay, great question. Really great question. And I think it's something that I'm trying to get even more comfortable with working improvisationally. I used to do sketches, and originally those sketches would work for something that had a really clear idea of the final product that I wanted. But for instance, with the moths, I had a problem with scale. So I would do a sketch of a moth. And for instance, I would think, oh, I want the eye spot to be a black circle. And in my mind, I thought, okay, that black circle could be a bicycle tire. Well, then when I got down to actually making the piece, the scale was completely off. The bicycle tire did not fit in the actual moth wing. So I had to stop thinking like that. And I stopped doing sketches altogether. And I'll do like just a concept idea of, okay, this is going to be a fluid piece. And that's as far as I get. And I found that working with my materials is where my strengths lie. I have to work with the actual materials, and that's where I become more relaxed and less rigid, and things start to become more fluid, and it's hard. It's hard to let go. And but I've found that those are probably some of my most successful pieces where I was able to let go, see the piece as it was happening, as opposed to having this set idea, this rigid idea of what it was going to be. And that's the beauty of creating art, is that you go with it. If you see something happening, don't ignore it, and embrace it. And that's when you've had a really good day in the studio, is when you see something that you hadn't planned, it's working, and you close the door of the studio and you're like, yeah.
Michelle, thank you again for the generosity of your time and your talent. And thank you all for joining us for this artist talk by Michelle Stitzlein as a part of our programming for It's an Honor to Be Here. A special thank you to the curators, Maddie and Maria. A big thank you to all the participating artists, as well as to the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor, who all support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.